Futures trading involves risk and is not suitable for all investors. Content provided in this segment is meant for educational purposes and is not a solicitation to buy or sell commodities.
Hi, welcome to Humid Chicago and the July 26th edition of Basis Loaded with Joe Schmit. I am Joe Schmit. This episode, as always, is produced by Paige Driscoll, and what we do here is break down the latest from the NDPSR report, starting with butter. This butter number coming in at 252.32 is a plus 1 to the CME 1-week average of 251.15. Plus 1, a little bit lower than our expected basis. So you could say that that price level is a little bit of a disappointment. However, considering we traded 57 loads at the CME last week, that equates to 2.3 million pounds at essentially a 252 value. That's a lot of weight to change hands at the CME and could have been part of the reason why we have lower than normal basis. I think the biggest factor is that the CME was up 4 and the NDPSR up 8. So basis went from a -3 last week, recovering all the way to +1. So prices on the NDPSR are getting closer to where they historically should be, and a 4-cent improvement over last week's basis. All in all, I would have to call that a win for the butter manufacturer. Up next, cheese. This block number coming in at 144.91 represents a plus 7.5 to the CME 1-week average of 137.50. We traded 18 loads at the CME last week at an elevated level. So that might have gone a little bit of the ways in giving us this higher than expected basis, 7.5 over, of course, well over our expected 2 to 4 cent positive basis. It's interesting, even with that weight that we traded on the CME last week, the sales volume here on the NDPSR coming in well below our expected 12.5 million. So higher than expected basis in the blocks on lower than expected sales volume. This block number will be interesting to watch as we head into next week's report, which of course is the fifth and final NDPSR release for the July pricing. The CME weekly average increased 11 cents. So it'll be interesting to see how much of that big gain at the CME gets into next week's NDPSR. And then up next in the barrel, 143.02. That represents a plus 5.5 to the CME 2-week average of 137.55. So you'll remember I said that the CME block average 137.50, the CME 2-week barrel average 137.55, essentially parity between the two varieties of cheese. The only difference is that whereas the blocks were able to post a 7.5 positive basis, here in the barrels, only 5.5 over. So that's right in the middle of our expected 4 to 6 cent positive basis. We traded just a meager 12 loads last week at the CME. And 12 is on a normal week is a pretty respectable sales volume. However, compared to what we've been doing at the CME and the barrel lately, it feels like a pittance. Next week, I mentioned the change in the block. Using the 2-week average in barrels, we have an 8.2 cent increase in the barrels for that fifth and final week of NDPSR pricing for July. So it'll be interesting to see how basis reacts as prices at the CME have now begun their violent move higher. Opposite to the block, the barrel volume here, 1 million pounds over our expected 13.5 million. So even with seemingly meager volume trading at the CME, the barrel reported NDPSR volume still well over our expected 13.5 million. Impressive volume on maybe a little bit higher than expected basis. In whey, 25.44, that represents a +2, an exact 2 to the CME 1-week average of 23.44. We traded 43 loads on the CME last week at 2465. That 43 loads equates to essentially 1.7 million pounds. When you take the 1.7 million pounds that we traded at the CME last week, you add the previously contracted 4.5 level, that takes you to a volume of 6.2 million pounds. So the fact that our sales volume here on the NDPSR is north of 7.8 million leads you to believe that in addition to the CME volume and the previously contracted sales, that there was an additional 1.5 million flat price sale. And the fact that this week's dry whey release is down more than 2 cents from the July 8th NDPSR level of 27.57, that would lead you to believe that the trade at the CME and that flat price sale, possibly an export sale, went a long way in really pulling that NDPSR whey price down. And then lastly, NonFat, 114.78, down 2 cents from the July 15th NDPSR number. So a little bit of a reality check for NonFat. At that discounted level, the manufacturer was only able to move 16.8 million pounds. So a disappointment there. Disappointments all around in NonFat, except when you take this NDPSR price and compare it to the CME 1-week average of 110.56. Then you come up with a +4 positive basis, a little bit higher than maybe some would expect. So as I said, this is week 4 of 5 for the July pricing cycle, currently getting a July class 3 of 1380. The movement at the CME in cheese went a long way, in my opinion, of affecting the final settlement value. If the class 4 price, if you carry out current CME equivalents into next week, is 1830. So 1380 for class 3, 1830 class 4. We'll see what they have in store for us in the weeks to come. Until then, I'm Joe. On behalf of Paige, thanks so much. See you soon. Bye.
This episode of Basis Loaded was produced in cooperation with Everag. At Everag, we partner with every corner of the agriculture industry, from dairy to livestock, crops, and agribusiness, to deliver intelligent supply chain and risk management solutions. We are Everag, everything agriculture. Learn more at www.ever.ag/everything.